By the early 400s, Christianity had arrived in Ireland. At the time, the main religious beliefs were pagan, meaning there were multiple gods that were worshipped in Ireland, and these gods usually had a focus on nature. Druids were the spiritual advisors, similar to that of priests. By 200 AD, the Roman Empire had spread to England, and the main religion there was Christianity. The most famous bishop who came to Ireland to spread Christianity was Saint Patrick. He came to Ireland from Wales as an enslaved man. 6 years later, he escaped to Britain, but returned to spread Christianity to Ireland. While in Ireland, Saint Patrick converted and baptised thousands of people. Pagan festivals were still celebrated, but they were eventually absorbed into the Christian faith. Some Christians were so devoted to God that they chose to live in closed communities known as monasteries, and the first Irish monastery was built in the Aran Islands around 500 AD. It was named Inishmore. Women who devoted themselves to God were nuns, and men who devoted themselves were monks. They led strict, simple lives that involved praying and farm work. Beehive huts were built where monks would sleep. These beehive huts were small stone huts in the shape of a beehive. Cemeteries were also built during this time, and they were used to bury the dead. In order to spread the word of God, manuscripts were written. Before, oral tradition was the norm, where stories were spread by word of mouth from older generations to younger generations. However, these stories would get mixed up, so early Irish Christians began to write things down. These manuscripts were made from sheepskin or calfskin and were written in Latin. Elaborate Celtic patterns were drawn on the pages using crushed berries, powdered rocks, metals or beetles as paint. To write on the page, the monks would use goose feathers as quills and dipped the quills in ink. The most famous early Irish manuscript is the Book of Kells, which is housed in Trinity College, Dublin. Irish monks were also talented at metal work. They made brooches, bells, cups and belts, and decorated using gold, amber, coloured glass and silver. Celtic designs were common and overlapped with Christian designs. As well as metal work, they also did stone masonry. High crosses became commonplace, and these were freestanding crosses made of stone with elaborate carvings showing biblical scenes. As most people could not read at the time, these crosses helped to spread and teach Bible stories. After the Roman Empire fell, much of Europe fell into unrest and war, and this period from 500 AD to 1000 AD became known as the Dark Ages. Irish monks travelled abroad during this time and founded new monasteries in Europe, and they worked to convert much of Europe to Christianity. Around 700 AD, many people from Scandinavia set sail to the western coast of Europe. They became known as the Vikings and were excellent at shipbuilding and navigating the treacherous seas. The first recorded Viking attack on Ireland occurred in 795 AD and focused on monasteries, which had plenty of riches. Many monasteries were pillaged and burnt to the ground. By the middle 800s, Vikings had established bases and camps by water, known as long forts. Many were temporary, but a good few turned into permanent trading posts and large towns. The first Irish Viking settlement was on the River Liffey, built around the year 841 AD. The land became known as Dovlin, or Dark Pool in Irish, and this later became known as Dublin. Other parts of the country like Cork, Waterford and Longford became Viking settlements as well. By the mid-900s, Viking raids had died out, but their settlements remained and they traded with Gaelic Irish. Dublin became a centre for trading, and as the Viking town grew, people in Dublin built ditches with wooden fences and later large walls to protect the land. Dublin also traded with the English towns of Chester and Bristol. By the 11th century, Dublin's population grew to 4,000 people, and the first Bishop of Dublin was appointed in 1028. In the 1970s, remains of a Viking settlement were found in Dublin at Woodquay, Christchurch and the Temple Bar area. The remains of 200 houses from the 10th century and the 11th century were discovered. These houses were rectangular with thatched roofs and wattle and daub walls. There were streets as well as toilets and rubbish pits. A lot of jewellery was also discovered. You would expect that the site would be preserved, but it wasn't. Plans for buildings to be built on the site led to a large protest on the 23rd of September 1978. 20,000 people attended the protest, and sit-ins occurred at the site in 1979. Many international groups also got involved to preserve the site, and the Irish High Court agreed that the site was a national monument. However, the corporations and commissioners of the public works subverted this and built over the historic site. Due to protests and legal actions, many of the artefacts found were salvaged and are now on display in the National Museum of Ireland. Up to about 1100 AD, there were many Irish kings and warfare was common. At the largest and wealthiest town in Ireland, Dublin had a large army and was often attacked. One of the most famous battles of this time period was a battle that occurred in Clontarf in 1014. The Gaelic clans, united under the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, fought an Irish and Viking army led by Sitric Silkenbeard, the Viking King of Dublin. Brian Boru's army won, but he was later killed in his tent by the retreating Viking warriors.